Well, a very good evening, everybody, and welcome to this month's Solomon Live. My name is Brody. I have the pleasure, the honour of hosting these monthly webinars, and I'm also the Provincial Communications Officer for Worcestershire as well, so therefore a proud Freemason. So in typical fashion, we're letting you in nice and early to get settled, maybe grab a drink, just make sure that you don't miss a trick. And our very special guest this evening, you are in for such a treat. Freemasonry and the Foundation of the USA. And our special guest this evening, Akram Elias, sorry, forgive me, Akram. So we'll begin in just a few minutes' time. So get yourself settled and we'll begin in just a moment. A very good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Solomon Live. My name is Brody, and I have the honour of hosting these monthly webinars. And we'll begin in just a few minutes in time-honoured fashion, letting you join us nice and early so you don't miss a treat when we start around 7:30. And our topic this evening, very, very popular, I have to say, Freemasonry and the Foundation of the USA. We're going to find out so much in the next 45 minutes with our very special guest, Akram Elias. We'll begin very, very soon. Ladies and gentlemen and brethren, we're live across the world. Well, we will be in just a few minutes. Welcome to Solomon Live, a very special guest this evening, someone who appeared in Grand Lodge just a few months ago for the 1723 special meeting. So we're delighted to have Akram Elias with us tonight. He's going to be talking about Freemasonry and the Foundation of the USA. So just letting you in nice and early so you don't miss a trick. We'll begin in a couple of minutes' time. Ladies, gentlemen, and brethren, we are live across the UK. We are live across the world for this evening's Solomon Live. My name is Brodie. I have the honour and the privilege of hosting these monthly webinars of lively, engaging Freemasonry conversation. And I'm also the Provincial Communications Officer for the distinguished province of Worcestershire, so therefore a proud Freemason. Now, if you have any questions for our very special guest this evening, you can submit them right now via our question and answer facility on Zoom. So without any further ado, would you please welcome our very special guest this evening, Akram Elias, to discuss Freemasonry and the foundation of the USA. Akram, how are you?
Oh, I'm doing well, Brodie. It's good to be here with you.
And could I say, sir, happy 4th of July to you?
Well, thank you. Much appreciated. And guess where I am right now?
Well, I've got a sneaky feeling that that you're not in America. Whereabouts are you celebrating Independence Day, 4th of July?
I am in Durham.
There you go.
England, United Kingdom, Hague, the special relationship.
There you go. That's what it's all about. And also, before we begin, I must say congratulations to you as well on your appearance at Grand Lodge for the 1723 special meeting. I think it's safe to say that, Akram, that you went down a storm.
Well, thank you so much. It was really a great honor and a privilege, and I enjoyed every moment of it.
Oh, it was absolutely fantastic. I wasn't there, sadly, but I heard so many good things about it. Well, thank you ever so much indeed for joining us this evening. So in time honored fashion, what we like to do before we get into the topic is get to know you a little bit, if that's okay. So when did your family arrive in the USA?
Well, I came by myself. In fact, when I was 17 years old in 1978, my parents were still living in Beirut, Lebanon. And then, of course, they moved to France. My dad is buried right outside of Paris. My mom, brother, and sister still live in France. I have two brothers, and a sister who came to the United States as well. So I came quite young. I did not want to go to France. Wanted always to come to America because I loved Westerns. I'll share that with you. I love those Western TV series, Bonanza,
yes,
Big Valley. And lo and behold, I discovered later on that a lot of those values that I was attracted to were really Masonic values. It was those days when Masonry was quite strong in Hollywood.
So that brings us on nicely.
That
brings us on nicely to talk about why and when did you become a Freemason?
Why I became a Freemason, I was very much interested in it, as I did about 10 years working as a consultant with the Department of State. I was touring the country. I was accompanying delegations from the Middle East and North Africa. And I really got to know America from within. I discovered the country, the people, the system. I was like devouring. I was my own Alexis de Tocqueville, if you want, for about a decade. And in so doing, I started learning about the connection between Freemasonry and the history of the United States. What intrigued me first was a visit to Washington, D.C. in 1978-79. And it was the Washington Monument, this Egyptian-styled obelisk, as the official monument to George Washington. What was the connection? So anyway, I started learning about it, became very much interested in it. I had to wait till I finished that thing with State and started our own consulting business. And then a friend of mine and I were talking, and one thing led to another. And I joined, I knocked at the door, as we say, in 1996. And my initiation took place at the oldest, most historic lodge in Washington, D.C., Potomac Lodge, one of the founders of the Grand Lodge, and the custodian of the George Washington gavel. And to me, that symbolism started on that night because it happened to be on June the 18th. Now, for many people, they may not remember what June the 18th in history really means, but that was the appeal that Charles de Gaulle made out of London on June the 18th, 1940, an appeal to the French people to resist Nazi occupation and aggression. So I saw the light, of Freemasonry on that day. So it was like, to me, it just was very powerful.
Oh, and then a great story. I mean, to call it story is not doing it justice at all. And then we need to talk about your career in Freemasonry, because that's absolutely incredible, isn't it? Your journey in the Grand Lodge of Washington DC to becoming the Grand Master in 2008. What was that like for you, Akram? So a passionate Freemason with what people perceive as being the ultimate job.
Well, it was really the journey. No question. I enjoyed very much being Grand Master, but it was really the journey, building. I took this concept of being a builder, a Mason, literally. So every year, it was like a 12-year journey, if you want. And every year, trying to build on it, delve deeper into the meanings of Freemasonry, always focusing on the practical application. The beauty about Freemasonry, that it's not something out there. It is really very practical for the here and now. And so I guess invested myself very quickly, rose all the way up to become Grand Master. I must say that in the first couple of years, before getting in the line, as we say, being a Grand Officer, I almost quit.
Wow.
I almost quit Freemasonry because I had a lot of expectations, and I was not finding what it was until, this is why mentorship is so important in Freemasonry. And I ran into my first mentor, then my second one, and then a third one. And I thank all three of them, in fact, in the introduction, my Prestonian lecture, the published one. And that changed my course. And I invested myself in it. Beautiful. 2008, when I was Grand Master, our Grand Lodge hosted at that time the largest gathering of Masonic Grand Lodges. 121 Grand Lodges came to Washington, D.C. And we had a huge ceremony on the National Mall. It's just a, beautiful society that is sitting on gold.
Well,
put it this way.
Thank heavens we managed to get your Masonic career back on track, because look at what you've achieved, and joining us here this evening, and what we were talking about with Grand Lodge a little bit earlier as well. But let's get into our topic. Why a lot of people are joining us here this evening. So how and when did Freemasonry arrive in America? How did it spread?
Well, we owe it obviously to the British. Wherever the British Empire went, the constitutions of the Freemasons traveled, and they, seeded nations and societies and impacted them in different ways. So in the United States, we're talking really in the early 1700s. So around the 1730s, 32, 33, you start seeing really lodges. England, English Constitution was definitely a dominant one, but we had the Scots and we had the Irish. So basically all three. So for example, in the case of Virginia, the Grand Lodge of Virginia came to be out of 9 lodges that came together: Scottish, English, and Irish. Of course, Massachusetts and Pennsylvania, always there's that rivalry, who's first, etc. And the English, of course, were first in both. But then you have the Scots that came in. South Carolina was very English. So I would say it was the British. That's how it came to be. And then in 1734, this is a very important year. So we're talking 11 years after the constitutions of the Freemasons were adopted. 1734, Dr. Benjamin Franklin became Grand Master in Philadelphia. And in that same year, he published the constitutions in the United States, in the colonies, I should say. Published them. Those made their way throughout, the colonies, enabling the establishment of Masonic lodges throughout the country. So
without Benjamin Franklin, how would Freemasonry have developed, do you think, without him?
Well,
how important was he?
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to speculate really, but I'm sure it would have still developed. But I think the publishing of the constitutions, this is why I focused a lot on this. And, this year marks the tercentenary, or as we say, the tricentennial in America, of the constitutions. It is the publishing of the constitutions that was so important, because that became the document. You see, the constitutions create the framework, basically, of the ecosystem, the Masonic Lodge. And then the ritual works within that ecosystem. But the constitutions were necessary to have uniformity, in a way, in the construct of the lodge. And no question, they were an incredible gift.
Oh, well, and that's what you describe it as being, don't you, quite a lot when I've heard you speaking in the past?
Yeah.
It is the English gift, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And it's, again, it enabled the establishment of Masonic lodges, and Masonic lodges had a unique contribution to America, the Great Experiment. It's, if I may delve deep into this, the Great Experiment a little bit, the founding fathers of the United States, they decided to set up a system of governance completely different from the past. They did not want to repeat past democratic experiments because they were not sustainable. And the key point that was identified for the lack of sustainability was, as long as government is looked at as the entity that solves the problems of the people, then the people, over time, abdicate their responsibility and therefore really abandon their freedom. Because without responsibility, there's no true freedom. And what happens within a couple of generations, when failure in governance takes place, and there'll always be failures. I mean, we're humans, we live in an imperfect world, and government goes through a major crisis, come those individuals thirsty for power, very charismatic, and say, hey, give me the power and I'll make government work for you. I'll make government solve your problems, and welcome to dictatorship. So what they did, they said, we're not doing that. We're going to construct what I call a system engineering machine. So government is a system engineering machine with checks and balances, separation of powers, limited government, public-private partnerships, that is resilient, adaptable, and unhijackable for the people to use to solve their problems. And now the burden became on the people. The people have to be free, responsible, and constantly seeking enlightenment. This was the true gift of the constitutions.
Oh, beautifully explained.
I honestly, listen, to my core, I truly believe if it weren't for the 1723 constitutions and Freemasonry, I truly believe that the Great Experiment the founding fathers launched would not have been sustainable.
And that's the biggest compliment we can give it, isn't it? And we were talking about the touching on the people who became Freemasons. So what kind of backgrounds did they come from, Akram, back in the day?
Well, all backgrounds. This was very important. In Europe, there was a lot of debate, obviously, about the philosophy and intellectual debates, about projects for society. This was very different in the United States, because the concept of governance, by putting the people at the core of governance, not the government, but the people at the core of governance, then you had to have as many ordinary Americans, as many people as possible, understand how to be free and responsible, build a civic culture, and use government as a partner, not as a ruler. So Masonic lodges focus on bringing the ordinary man. And what do we mean by ordinary man? It was really considered the pillar. Who were the pillars of the community? Whether it did not matter what your station in life was. In other words, your social economic status. The question was, were you a builder? Were you a contributor to the development of your community? So whether you're a baker, a carpenter, a pastor, a farmer, or an elder person, it didn't matter. Every person who was like building, contributing to the development of the community was targeted to be member of the lodge. So these people of diverse background, and of course, Irish, English, Scottish, Prussian, I mean, remember the diverse populations, they were the ones who were attracted to the Masonic lodges in order to learn, this civic culture that was necessary to sustain the experiment.
And how did they join back in the day as well, Akram? So we've spoken about the different backgrounds. Was there a tap on the shoulder? Did they see what was happening and want to be part of that?
Yes, it's a combination of all these. So people went out there and got their friends and people who watched other successful people in it. They were attracted to it. After all, George Washington himself wanted to become a Freemason because he saw some of the really prominent people of the time, were Freemasons. So it was something to be attracted to, so. You talk to your friends. It was never a secret society in the United States. This is really very important to keep in mind. Never. I mean, George Washington laid the cornerstone of the United States Capitol, on September 18th, 1793, leading a parade of Freemasons, wearing his Masonic regalia and conducting a Masonic ceremony of a cornerstone laying. And who's who at the time in our country was present. So it was sending a very powerful message from day one. We're not a secret society. This is really very important. So you could easily and more openly, attract people. In fact, it became so powerful that what happened in the United States, the first third national party ever was called the Anti-Masonic Party. It was not a party for something. It was an anti-Masonic party because Masonry was so successful in bringing the pillars of communities all around. And that was necessary. You needed at least 2 generations with that civic culture of governance in order to sustain the experiment. So that the success brought about an anti-Masonic party and a movement. Thank goodness, it didn't last for long.
Let's not spend too much time on this. But what other kind of resistance was around in the 18th and 19th century when Freemasonry in America, in the USA, was doing so well?
Well, there was a famous and infamous, Morgan affair, and you hear all about that from different perspectives, no matter what the perspectives were, who did exactly what. We're not here to debate it. The effect was that the anti-Masonic movement really gained a lot of momentum, and Masonry came under attack in pretty much across the country. People were started, the conspiracy theories. That these Masons control the world, and blah, 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 so we got to get rid of them, etc. And there was a huge decline in Freemasonry across the country. The revival took place and in a different form, that is Freemasonry changed the way it engaged American society in different parts of the country. This is where you started seeing a lot of emphasis on charitable works and more being out there in the community in order to get rid of that conspiracy, but it did a lot of damage. But then guess what? Freemasonry recovered, came back stronger than it was, and for many, many decades its golden age was still ahead, in other words.
Brilliant. Thank you, Akram. And we'll get to some questions in just a moment. I am keeping an eye on our question and answer facility, ladies and gentlemen and brethren, and lots of the questions that I'm seeing I've already asked. So hope you understand that. Now, we've talked about the history of Freemasonry in America. We've spoken about the kind of people who became Freemasons, but now let's talk about the various documents. What impact did the 1723 constitutions have on those?
Well, I think there were the impact was big and very important. If you look at the Declaration of Independence, of course, we speak about the inalienable rights the laws of nature. This whole concept of natural rights is something that really came out of the teachings, of Freemasonry. As it is said, it was said by several at that time in the United States, these rights are inalienable. They're not given by men to other men. Therefore, it has nothing to do with democracy. They're untouchable, not only by government, but by the people. They're individual rights, and these rights were enshrined in the Bill of Rights that a founding father of the United States and a prominent Freemason by the name of George Mason. He's the one who drafted the Bill of Rights for the state of Virginia. And those became the basis for the development of the United States Bill of Rights. And Article 1 of the Bill of Rights, which means the First Amendment, the US Constitution, it defines 5 natural rights. And why is that important? Because in the United States, no law can be made by any level of government that limits or eliminates any of these 5. And this is why we insist on the concept of the grand architect of the universe. Because these rights cannot be made hostage or left to the whim of the population. With populism, people may say democratically, they may say, hey, Brody, we don't like your religion. Akram, we don't like your political opinion. And they can democratically, vote to eliminate liberty. And that is totally unacceptable. So the concept of the grand architect, from which we get this moral civic code, and those rights are at the core of it. Now, for the United States, those rights became the foundation of, first, a new identity. The Constitution, 1723 Constitutions, a lot of people may not think about that, but really Freemasonry with the Constitutions developed a new construct of identity. Identity, because you have religious tolerance, there is meritocracy. These are some of the things that the Constitution's self-improvement. So no matter what your social economic status is, you can improve yourself by seeking education, knowledge in the arts and sciences. So it's a new construct of identity that is away from, or the opposite, in fact, of tribalism, sectarianism, racism. And these 3, sectarianism, racism, tribalism, I call them the 3 social viruses. They're like the 3 ruffians. They're constantly attacking a free society or a free builder. So we need constantly to counter them, be inoculated, if you want, against them. So it's the constitutions created a new construct of enlightened identity. In the United States, this is exactly what happened. We in this country, in the United States, never had a government department of culture, what you call Ministry of Culture in parliamentary system. Never. So identity is not culturally based. We've never had a Department of Information. Identity is a constitutional political construct. The Masonic Lodge brought people of different nationalities, believing in different religions, various ethnicities, and learned how to become brothers, a new identity as a Mason. So that was transposed, if you want, and projected onto the experiment itself. And that's why I keep saying, without the Masonic lodges, I really believe the experiment would not have been successful.
And when it comes to the average American, do you think they know about the importance of the 1723 constitutions in the creation of the Declaration of Independence, US
Nope.
Constitution's Bill of Rights? Do you think they know that connection?
No, of course not. And this is one of the challenges, by the way, I mentioned in my, as we look to the future, I identify some key challenges, let's say, in American society. And these challenges, I identified 6 of them, and these present opportunities, therefore. Great opportunities for Freemasonry. But one of them has to do with the fact that the new generation, based on all the data, the statistics, the surveys, my God, I mean, there is a large majority of the millennials and the other generation, younger after them, They can't tell you what were the 13 founding states. They can't name the 3 branches properly of our government. Do you really think they're going to know anything about the 1723 constitutions?
Yeah, when you put it like that, yeah.
we have a lot of work to do.
Yes, you do, and you're doing it, sir. Now, let's just take a break just for a second. Look at a few questions that we're getting in
Sure.
right now before we continue. And Terry's been in touch. He says, "Why do American lodges have an altar in the centre of the lodge rather in the UK having a Bible in front of the worshipful master?"
It's a great question. And by the way, in my Grand Lodge in Washington, D.C., you may visit lodges that have that are similarly set up, like in the UK. In other words, the altar is by the worshipful master, and others, find it in the center of the lodge. Well, it's the idea behind it. Always in rituals, you have different messages, but ultimately, when you take it as a whole, no matter what the ritual is, the universality of the message is the same. So specifically here, the idea is that where you take your obligation, you as a person, you're now the point in the center of the circle. You're at the center of the lodge. And then on the altar, you have the 3 great lights. The volume of the sacred law, very important. On volume of sacred law, the square and compasses. And this is to teach the Mason that no matter what your religious belief is, tolerance is very important, because you'll always find, in whatever religion it is, you can find people who manipulate the content of a holy book and take things out of context to preach hatred towards the other. So a Mason is taught to deepen his, her, in the case of a woman Mason, in their belief, but always apply the square and the compasses. Circumscribe your passions, so don't fall into extremism, and always act on the square with rectitude and fairness. This way, we remain centered and free. And you are at the center of the lodge. Everybody else is here to support you when you get initiated. And therefore, when we invoke the blessing of deity in the opening of a lodge, it is happening right there in the center. That is the symbolic significance, in that kind of ritual.
Oh, brilliant. Akram, thank you. Terry, what a great question that was. And there are some lodges in the north of England who adopt that approach as well. So let's get back to the history side of American Freemasonry now. How did the waves of immigrants in the 18th and 19th century change the landscape of Freemasonry there?
Oh, tremendously. I mean, Freemasonry is constantly constantly evolving. The same way the great experiment is always in the making. You don't turn the clock back. You keep moving forward. But while you move forward, there are ups and downs, but you constantly move forward. Well, obviously, different streams of immigrants came in and added their own cultural, had their own cultural input. They became, also joined Freemasonry. That's how Catholics, for example, whether it's the Irish or Italians, for example, and then you start seeing ethnic, for example, in Washington, we have the oldest, German-speaking lodge, goes back to the, late, I think 1870, 1875, Armenia's, lodge, for example. And then also, as the country was growing, expanding westward. So the type of territory, obviously in farming areas, you're going to operate differently than in urban settings. So it was constantly evolving, but there was one thing that was constant throughout until really the 60s, 1960s. And the constant thing was pillars of the community were attracted to the Masonic Lodge.
That's brilliant, thank you. But let's have a look at how it differed across the different states as well, Akram. How did that work? I should imagine it went at different speeds.
Yes, and we've had our share of how Masonry spread, also because we had territories that later became states. After all, we started with 13. So by 1791, basically, when the Bill of Rights was ratified in December of 1791, 12 of the 13 founding states had already established their independent Grand Lodges. So then you had territories, and Freemasonry went into territories and organized itself before statehood. This is really very interesting. And often you will see that the organizers of Freemasonry in a territory and the leaders of that territory became founding fathers of that state, et cetera, et cetera. Now, you see New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Virginia, some of the older, obviously well-established Grand Lodges started chartering, lodges in those territories, and wasn't always amicable. There was competition happening, and then over time, basically, those lodges came together with their diverse backgrounds and established their own Grand Lodges. For example, believe it or not, our Grand Lodge of Washington, D.C. had a lodge called California Lodge number 13 that went to the territory of California and became one of those lodges that founded, the Grand Lodge of California, for example. So the different cultures impacted those territories, plus the immigrants. People who migrated to the Great Lakes area, for example, were looking for jobs. There were great famines around the world that led people to migrate, to immigrate to the United States, and those people settled territories. And then again, the Masonic Lodge was a place where they learned this new civic culture, no matter where they came from, no matter what country they had come from. They in a way, they learned what it means to be an American without going to class, but basically by practicing Freemasonry.
Thank you, Akram. Thank you for helping us understand that, how it travelled across the states. Now, let's discuss something that many people feel uncomfortable hearing and talking about, but obviously to look at the future and to work out where we are now, we need to look at the past. How did Freemasonry deal with racial divides from slavery through segregation to the civil rights movement, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. This was really the cancer from the start.
That's a good way of describing, isn't it, really?
It was really a cancer. And the founding fathers of the United States really did not touch the cancer, did not touch any of the problems, because they devoted all their energies on designing what I call, again, the system engineering machine, hoping that future generations of Americans will use the machine to improve their own human condition. And it proved to be sustainable. I mean, whether there was the abolitionists or the suffragists or civil rights activists or human rights activists, every civic group, whatever it is, used the same constitution, and the Bill of Rights improved upon time, with time to improve and uplift their human condition. Now, so what happened from the beginning, that cancer had blacks and white really be separate. Thanks again, here again, we thank the 1723 Constitution and the English gift. The English, obviously initiated Prince Hall in 1775 with 14 others, free blacks, that created their first called African Lodge. That became, it's called as the Prince Hall affiliation, the beginning of Prince Hall Masonry. So Freemasonry developed two separate segregated streams, a white stream and a black stream. In my Prestonian lecture, for the sake of brevity, I would call it the George Washington stream and the Prince Hall stream, just because Prince Hall was a person. Because on the white side, there is no one person to go to. But I use George Washington just because he's so admired. These two streams developed completely separate. There was a lot of racism, a rejection of our black brothers, to the point where many even considered them to be clandestine. And I always would argue, how can you call Prince Hall clandestine when they got the light of Freemasonry from England? But you see, ignorance is one of those things that we have constantly to conquer. Now, both streams worked very effectively on their respective communities while being estranged from one another. So if you look at Prince Hall Freemasonry, oh my God, with the exception probably of like Frederick Douglass I mean, all the abolitionists, the leaders, of the black emancipation movement were Prince Hall Freemasons. I mean, Prince Hall worked so much on really improving the conditions of the black communities in the United States. Of course, the fight against abolition, later on against the Jim Crow laws, the segregation, etc. On the white side, you had some individual Freemasons who were actively engaged in that, but overall, institutionally, they were like really very, very separate. And it wasn't until really late in the 20th century that, these two streams started coming together. And I think this is one incredible opportunity today for, again, the applications of the teachings of Freemasonry, for Prince Hall Masons and George Washington Masons to come together and figure out how to apply, how to exemplify those teachings in our respective communities. Nothing speaks stronger than deeds. We can talk forever. Talk is cheap. Freedom of speech is not, but talk is cheap. So what we need is to act, and working together in improving racial relations in our communities, not by talking about it, by doing things together, is a very powerful thing. And that is a golden opportunity that we should not miss.
Beautiful words, absolutely. Hear, hear. And I should drop in a little plug here, ladies and gentlemen and brethren. We've spoken about Black Freemasonry before on Solomon Live, and that's when we spoke we spoke to James Morgan III, and we spoke about Prince Hall and Black Freemasonry in general, and I think he would agree with a lot of what you've had to say there. You can track that down by getting yourself along to the Solomon website in no time at all. Back to the chat screen, and we've got a few questions asking about the Civil War, actually. So did Freemasonry play a positive role during the American Civil War? Was there any impact on preserving the unity of the USA? Ramsey, for example, has asked that question.
Yes, indeed. Obviously, many of the officers and the generals on both sides of the conflict, of the divide, were Freemasons. They considered in each case their loyalty to their side to be, as good Masons. That's their loyalty to the country in which they believed the country was split in two. What happened, we know, and there are numerous books really that have been written on that topic of how Masons rescued one another on the battlefield, and very importantly after the war in the rebuilding, in bringing communities together, etc., etc. I mean, there is very rich literature. There are even monuments dedicated to that, including Friend to Friend in Pennsylvania. It's huge, and I would not be doing you justice in this program because really this can take an entire program in and of itself, but no question about it. Huge positive contribution in saving lives, rebuilding lives, helping Masonry rebuild itself to a certain extent.
And flipping that over, do you think it also helped Freemasonry to spread?
It did, but also we have to remember that on the other hand, Freemasonry in the former South, that is in the Civil War, and later during the period of segregation, Freemasonry in those states as institutions did not do anything really of note to put an end to the system of segregation that existed, which is really institutionalized, legalized, kind of racism in the United States. Again, individuals did, but as institutions, they remained really on the margins. So yes and no, it's a checkered. I mean, we have to be really very honest about it. It's a checkered past, in a way like the checkered floor of the lodge. And each one of us as Masons always, goes through life. And as you journey and you chart your own course of how to improve yourself as a Mason, you go through darkness and light. And the institution also, the same way the country had its dark chapters. It's the metaphor But ultimately, we came out stronger. Ultimately, it took a long struggle. The civil rights movement, we just when we celebrated the 300th anniversary of the Constitution in Washington, D.C., and we were very honored and privileged to have the program master, Brother Jonathan Spence, join us, leading a delegation from the United Grand Lodge of England. We did honor our late brother, John Lewis, who was congressman, prominent civil rights movement, civil rights leader, excuse me, and who exemplified, in a way, that those values and left supported an institution dedicated to propagating the light of civil rights. We should not tolerance at all levels, not just religious tolerance, tolerance of anyone who is different, no matter who they are, where they're coming from. This is an essential trait of Freemasonry, and we need to really live up to it.
Absolutely. A responsibility for us all. And let's look at where we are today. So we've discussed the history. We've discussed the kind of people who were becoming Freemasons, its early origins, the 1723 Book of Constitutions. So when we take all that into account, what's the impact now on USA society and Freemasonry in the USA right now?
Well, right now we have major challenges that present great opportunities. Honestly, one big, huge challenge is the threat that we face, and that is that democracy may turn into mobocracy. That is the rule of the mob versus the rule of the people. And there's a big difference, because part of having a democratic society, no escaping that, every now and then you're going to have populist movements. But if the average person who is a builder in their community, a pillar of the community, is well inoculated against populism, in other words, is centered. Without being a centered individual, you cannot really be free. This is one of the fundamental teachings of Freemasonry. Neither inclined to the right nor to the left. You're the center. There's a duality. Don't fall into extremes. So we need today Masonic lodges in the United States to graduate as many Freemasons as possible. We need as many citizens to come out of Masonic lodges being more centered, more free, use their compasses so they don't fall into emotional extremes, don't become blind sheep, but be more eagles. This is fundamental to protect a democratic society from the negative impact of populism. So you contain it. You cannot eliminate it, but you contain it. This is very important. That is, I believe, a fundamental contribution, opportunity for Freemasonry. The other thing is, today we're so polarized as a society, and democratic societies pretty much around the world. Have a similar situation in a way. And you cannot debate complex issues with a few tweets and characters. It just doesn't make sense. Complex problems require complex solutions, which means you need a safe space where people can really discuss and debate. So for individuals to build this culture, this is again what the Masonic Lodge had done in the past, and now is needed more than ever, to equip the people so they can go outside of the lodge and be able to debate one another with more respect. We cannot be honest and true if we're governed by political correctness, on the one hand. On the other hand, we cannot find common ground if you immediately label the other side, whoever it is, as fascist or communist. I mean, it doesn't make sense. We've got to build common ground. So that art of the debate with respect, our tolerance of the other's opinion is very important. Again, huge responsibility, I think, an opportunity for the Masonic Lodge. I mentioned the racial divide. I think the Masonic Lodges have a huge and unique opportunity, because there's no other organization or institution in the United States that can really fulfill that mission the way Freemasonry can. And there's another one also I believe is very important for us in the United States, and has to do with providing a safe space for women. And the reason being is that our societies are changing. I mean, I'm not going to bore you here. In my published Prestonian, I give the statistics where women were 20 years ago, where they are now, and what is expected over the next 20 years. Women are ascending to all positions of influence, of leadership. They are becoming the pillars of communities everywhere. And I ask a simple question: wouldn't you want an institution that would take good women and help them better themselves? I'd rather have that. So how to do it, there are many ways. I'm not going to get into it right now, but I think this is a very important, it's a challenge that offers a great opportunity. I know you in England were, I think, way ahead by providing that space for women to organize themselves and their own Grand Lodges. It takes time. Not every woman would like to do that. In the United States, we have something called the Order of the Eastern Star, which is attractive. I think the more choices women have to better themselves, whether it's Order of the Eastern Star or women Freemasons, I think Grand Lodges in the United States need to be avant-gardists.
Well, Akram, that brings us up to date. We've spoken about the history and we've spoken about the current state of play, as far as you're concerned, with regards to Freemasonry in the USA. Can I just say, I've absolutely loved that. I've been hanging off your every word and learned so much in the last 45 minutes. But the most important thing is, have you enjoyed your Solomon Live experience here this evening?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Brody. Very, very much so. In spite of jet lag, I haven't had sleep. I had like 2 hours of sleep.
Wow, that's impressive.
But hey, I mean, here you go. You can see it. You can feel it.
Oh, well, listen, you were absolutely brilliant. We can't thank you enough. So many questions coming in. As always, ladies and gentlemen and brethren, I can't get to them all, but I gave it my best shot as per usual. Akram, thank you for joining us here this evening. And our next Solomon Live is another interesting one. Tuesday, the 8th of August, 2023, of course, where our topic will be Freemasonry, a unifying tool in the Far East, with a territory encompassing 3 countries. District Grand Master of Eastern Archipelago, Right Worshipful Brother Dato Jayaraj Ratnaswamy will be joining us, sharing his thoughts on how Freemasonry unites brethren from diverse cultures, kind of like what we've been talking about here this evening. So that's Tuesday, the 8th of August at 7:30. That'll be UK time. And if you haven't done so already, please register for Solomon. Solomon.ugle.org.uk is where you'll find it, full of useful and fantastic content for your daily advancement in Masonic knowledge. Until then, thank you for joining us this evening. Stay well, and we'll see you back here very, very soon. Good night, everybody.